Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 377 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. With the recent appearance of snow in our apiaries, there's a belated Christmassy feel to the scene. Not that it's lasted very long at all for me here in Norfolk. We've been feeding warm fondant to some of our nucleus colonies, and that's triggered something of a social media response. Listen in, and I'll explain exactly what I've been up to. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. This week's podcast is brought to you, in part, by High Five Multi-Guard. So,
when you need a little peace of mind that your bees are safe from dangers of all kind, pesticides, hornets, wasps and mice are no match for High Five. The High Five Multi-Guard is the best one in town. Keeps your bees safe all year round. The ultimate solution has been found. It's High Five.
The High Five Multi-Guard fits nearly all beehives and makes beekeeping much easier. High Five.
hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. And a very chilly feel to the ongoing weather pattern. The past week has been icy, snowy, wet, windy and sunny. I suspect for some here in the UK it's been downright miserable. A bit like this cold that I've got for me. But apart from a few days of icy conditions, it's pretty much all melted away for us here in Norfolk. Not that we now have tropical conditions by any stretch of the imagination, but for the most part we're back to a more normal east of England kind of condition. Rain instead of snow. But it does look like the rain is forecast to be here for a couple of weeks, with maybe the odd glimpse of the sun. I guess remember these days when we're all complaining about the lack of rain in June or July in the summer. I think parts of the UK are, right now, facing some very heavy snowfall. Heavy for the UK, that is, you understand. Some reports of around 30 centimetres of snow falling, which for us is fairly dramatic. The impact on our bees, less so, I would suggest. We don't very often have our hives buried in snow, certainly not for a very long time if it does happen. I can only remember maybe 2 or 3 occasions where I've seen snow building up to the roof of a hive here in Norfolk, and then, as I've said, it's gone pretty quickly. The reason for mentioning this is a few messages and comments from worried beekeepers about entrances becoming blocked and bees dying because of it. Stop worrying would be my first message. Most UK beekeepers are using open mesh floors, so there will be plenty of airflow in and around your colony. They're highly unlikely to suffocate. In fact, there's probably more chance of me winning the Euro Millions lottery than your bees dying because of a snowdrift blocking the entrance and them suffocating. Just in case, I'm going to pop out and grab a ticket. I'll be right back. If the probability gods are smiling down on me, and not you, then do drop me a message and I'll happily replace your dead colony. Just to be clear though, I have to win the lottery and your bees have to die because of a snow blockage. And no spurious claims, please. Okay, back to the real world. My bees are doing just great. We've had a quick trundle around the apiaries and seen flying bees from the majority of hives, even with what limited snow there is, but mostly ice, lots of ice laying around. It's amazing what a little warm sunshine will do to encourage bees out of a hive, even when the air temperature is almost freezing. A quick toilet break, maybe collect some water from plants that have been in a little of that warm sunshine, and then back to the hive before they freeze to death. It's a cycle that will repeat itself over and over from now until the warm spring sunshine finally burns away those frosts and we're into a new season. Plenty of time for slips and trips between now and then though, so don't relax too much. The colonies that I didn't see bees flying from were quickly checked for signs of life. A simple matter of unstrapping, lift the lid and have a look inside. Most of the time you'll see a few little heads moving slowly beneath the coverboard or chromeboard, wondering who on earth has just stolen their roof. Get that roof back on quickly and there'll be no damage done. Once that check is complete, a quick heft to establish food stores and the strap gets replaced. If I can get round all of my apiary sites and check 93 colonies in one day, then most beekeepers should be able to check in on a dozen or so without any delay or excuses. You've worked hard to get them to this stage of the winter. Don't let them fail now because you haven't been out to check them. I say we checked all 93. I am in fact lying. It was 92. Remember the tiny nuke from my garage roof? Well, that one is so well wrapped up that I didn't have the heart to disturb it. I did see a couple of bees flying out, so hopefully they were residents and not robbers. I have promised myself I'll get back there just as soon as I can to check in on them once the weather breaks. Hopefully we'll get a dry spell in amongst all of this rain that we're having. Fondant and social media is my next subject, and the main subject for today's podcast. Now, I'm quite used to receiving comments about my beekeeping practices these days. Let's face it, if you're going to stick your head above the parapet, sometimes someone is going to take a shot. So, I posted about warming our fondant prior to putting it on the colonies and got a couple of comments about it killing bees because it will drip down into the hive, or in this instance, presumably a nuke, because I think that was the photograph we posted. Because it's warm, and warm fondant has a tendency to flow. I wanted to just clear up this issue here with an explanation of exactly what we do, and add a caveat that common sense needs to be involved at some point. Fondant can be bought in bulk or in convenient single packs ready for use on a hive or nuke. It's a valuable way of feeding bees that need a top-up during these winter months. Cold blocks of fondant are a real challenge to manipulate and mould into a decent shape that suits the hive or the nuke that you're placing it on. It can make it difficult for the bees to feed on until it warms up sufficiently. If you place cold fondant on your hive directly above the bees, it will warm and soften, but at the expense of drawing heat away from your cluster of bees. It acts as a heat sink. In order to warm up the fondant, heat has to be taken from somewhere in the hive, and the only place it can come from is your cluster of bees. Why not help them out a little by pre-warming the fondant so that it's already at a usable temperature for the bees? Room temperature is kind of what I'm thinking about here. This also has the added benefit of making it pliable in a kind of Play-Doh, plasticine kind of way. What I'm not suggesting, and never have suggested, is that you warm the fondant to the point that it becomes almost liquid. Following on from this is the container that you put it in and the placement of the fondant on the hive. If you buy your fondant in smaller packs and place a single packet on a hive, all you do is cut an appropriately sized hole into the bag for the bees to access the fondant, and away you go. I can hear the next question already. What's an appropriately sized hole? Well, that depends on the size of colony and the hive or nuke box that you're putting it onto. Here's a couple of examples. In fact, the first is exactly the way I put fondant on our BS Honeybees 2-in-1 nukes recently that generated those comments. In the feeder of the nuke is a round hole, approximately 3 or 4 centimetres in diameter. It's there purposefully to feed fondant. A smaller nucleus colony with bees seen beneath that hole, but not in the feeder, gets a hole cut into the bag of fondant that's about the same size as the hole. And this is placed directly onto the feeder hole so the bees can come up and access the fondant. A larger nucleus colony that has bees actively moving around and up into the feeder in search of food gets a slightly different approach. A much larger hole is cut so that more bees can access the fondant, and this hole is offset above the feeder hole and given room for access by using the rubber bung that normally lives in the feed hole as a kind of post to hold the fondant bag up to allow the bees access to it. I hope this is making sense to you. We use bulk bags of fondant. I think they're around 14 kilograms. And we cut these down and place the fondant into self-seal bags. These bags have quite a thick wall to them, so don't collapse with the weight of the fondant in them. By warming them, it allows me to manipulate the fondant into an appropriate shape for the nuke or hive, depending on the situation, as you've probably seen in our videos. If you are using solid plastic containers, such as the kind of takeaway style tubs, and you're warming the fondant too, then I would suggest leaving a lid on and cutting a hole in the lid to prevent the warmed fondant from simply falling down into the hive or nuke through whatever feed hole you have. Again, just think about what's happening and remember, gravity is going to do the rest. We're going to head over to the paddock to revisit these nukes and show how effective the feeding has been. They looked really strong, so may well need another top-up of fondant, as they did feel particularly light when we hefted them last time. Finally, on the subject of feeding fondant in this way, we do, on some occasions, place the fondant directly onto the brood frame top bars in order to get the food as close to the bees as possible. This might be because they've become isolated away from the remaining food that they have, and we can't get the coverboard in a position to allow the bees to access fondant above it. Typically, this happens with the honey pour hives because they have a clear coverboard without any holes cut into them. In this instance, I wrap the bulk fondant in food cling wrap, maybe a couple of times, and cut small holes that correspond to the gaps between the frames. If filled with bees, we call these seams. This allows the bees to quickly feed and with the maximum number of bees, while at the same time controlling the amount of fondant that is accessible, holding its shape and not dropping between the frames to smother the bees. If you're very concerned about this risk, you could always use some mesh to hold the fondant in place while the bees feed through the holes, but this risks delaying rapid feeding that might be required. As with most things in beekeeping, there are many ways to do some of these fundamental but basic tasks, and you'll soon figure out a method that works best for you and your bees. Key takeaways here, excuse the pun, key takeaways here are don't heat the fondant beyond the malleable state, don't turn it into a runny slurry as it were, and get the food where the bees can best use it. Time to move on, I think. Keep hefting and if necessary feed, but I'm sure all will be well in your apiary. The Bees on a Budget series of videos has been well received. Thanks to everyone for your comments on that. I'll be getting back on that project probably in February, I think. Making up frames, getting some wax into those frames, maybe setting up a stand, that kind of thing. It could be a long way off before we get bees into the hives. It just depends on the weather, of course, doesn't it always? If you're thinking of buying a nuke to get started or maybe to replace lost colonies, make sure that you sit on your hands and wait. Then wait some more, particularly if you're a beginner beekeeper. As each week goes by into the spring, your chances of success increase exponentially. Taking a nucleus colony very early in the spring can seem like a great idea. You're excited to start beekeeping, you've made up your beehive Christmas present, and you're just itching to get started. My advice would be to just hold off until we start to see settled spring weather. And by that I really mean warmer weather. Taking ownership of a nuke in March, because we have an early warm spell, might seem like a great idea, but here's why I suggest waiting. When we take a nuke and move it into a full-size hive, we're asking quite a lot of that small colony. We want them to take on the task of building new comb on fresh foundation. We're asking them to manage the brood nest that they have, but in a much larger space. And we want them to get out and forage to provide resources for doing all of that, as well as maybe getting some stored for future use. We will, of course, add a feeder and give them some sugar syrup to help, which is great, but if the weather suddenly turns cold, as it can in March and April, we now have a small colony in a large cold box with a cold heat sink of sugar syrup directly above them, drawing away valuable warmth from the cluster of bees beneath. This can really set back a growing nucleus colony, sometimes to the point that they never really get going until the late summer, by which time any hope of a crop of honey is rapidly fading. My suggestion would be to wait until late April and into May. I like to refer to this time as the point at which gardeners can feel safe to put out their tender plants without the risk of damage from frosts. I can almost guarantee that nucleus colonies moved into full-size hives at this time of the year are going to expand rapidly, build comb fast, and will have a queen excluder and a super or two on them in good time for a summer crop of honey. I do often hear from beekeepers who say they bought a nuke in the spring and didn't manage to get a crop of honey in their first year. If the weather gods play ball and the nuke is a decent one, you really should expect some honey. Get your nuke from a reputable source, work with them through the spring and early summer, and they will deliver. In fact, I'm so sure of it, I'd wager you could sign up to my Patreon support group, take all of the advice from my content, and produce more than enough honey in that first year to sell and easily pay for your subscription and have more to spare. I'll discuss the makeup of a quality nuke next week, and if you haven't ordered yours as yet, get in touch. We have some spare nukes still available. Finally, the new office update. It's built. I'm a little in awe of the guys that built it, to be honest. It was possibly the coldest week we've had for many a year. They drove over 2 hours here and back home each day and finished it in just 2 days. And I'm really pleased with it. The electrician has been over and fitted all the electrical points in place. I had to upgrade all of the electrical wiring in our garage because it just wasn't man enough for the job. Now we're safe and can fire up the extractor, pump and sump without blowing a fuse. I can also get all of the computer kit fired up in the office without any disruption too. Happy days, as they say. The plasterer was also spot on with his visit, walls and ceiling plastered, and I'm now waiting for it to dry out properly so I can get some paint on the walls. All this in less than a week. I'll shoot a video in the coming week to show you how things are progressing. Not really a beekeeping video, but I know that some of you are quite interested in what I'm doing and how it's going. All that remains is for me to shake off this blasted cold bug and I'll be a happy chappy. Well, that's it for this week. More of the ongoing change in location and the journey through these winter weeks as we head forward. But for all of you who haven't yet signed up to my Patreon page, I, together with Steph, have been creating beekeeping content for many years now. And if you're looking for some straightforward, down-to-earth tips and techniques, help and advice, then do take a look at my Patreon page. We have over 1,600 individual beekeeping posts, videos and podcasts filled with useful and timely help and advice. My approach is pragmatic and calm, sometimes entertaining, but always with help and support for beekeepers at the heart of what I do. I keep my videos short and concise wherever possible. No waffle, no flannel, just honest beekeeping advice from years of keeping bees. Head over to Google and search for Patreon and the Norfolk Honey Company.